All right, so today we're diving into a story that sounds like something ripped straight from a crime novel.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be taking a deep dive into the case of Leslie Irvin.
Leslie Irvin.
Now, that name might not immediately ring a bell, but trust me, this is one you won't forget. This guy, they called him Joe Goebbels.
Wow.
As we kind of unpack his crimes, you'll understand why that nickname is so disturbing.
Okay.
But this deep dive isn't just about the killer himself.
Okay.
This case actually had huge ripple effects across the U.S. legal system.
Hmm.
Really reshaped how we think about fair trials even today.
That's fascinating. What kind of sources do we have to work with on this one?
Well, we've got court records, tons of articles from back in the day,
Wow.
the whole 9 yards. So let's get into it.
All right, let's unpack this.
Before we get too deep into the legal stuff, though,
Okay.
let's set the scene. We're talking the 1950s,
Okay.
southwestern Indiana and Kentucky.
Okay.
Small towns, close communities.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, this wave of terror just hits. Oh, wow.
Irvin ends up linked to the murders of 6 people.
6 people.
6 lives cut short.
That's awful.
And it's important to remember, these weren't just statistics.
Right.
Behind the headlines, these were real people.
Right.
People like Mary Holland.
Okay.
She was only 33 years old, 3 months pregnant, when Irvin shot her during a robbery.
It's terrible.
Just awful.
You're right. It's so easy to lose sight of the individual victims.
Yeah.
When you're talking about a case with this many victims.
Right.
But each of them had a story.
Mm-hmm.
Like Wesley Kerr,
Mm-hmm.
29 years old,
Wow.
shot during a robbery.
Jeez.
And then you have the Saylor family.
Right.
Wilhelmina Saylor killed in her own home
Oh, my God.
during a burglary. Shot just like all the others.
Just awful. And then there's the Duncan family.
Right.
It's almost too horrible to even talk about.
Yeah.
Irvin broke into their home in Henderson, Kentucky.
Okay.
Goebel Duncan, his son Raymond, and Raymond's wife Elizabeth, all murdered.
Oh, my gosh.
Elizabeth's 2-year-old daughter was there, too.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Can you imagine that trauma?
No.
She was spared, thank goodness. But Goebel's wife, Mamie, she survived the attack.
Okay.
But she was left permanently blind.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah. And it really, it makes you think about the devastating ripple effect these crimes have.
Yeah.
Not just the immediate loss, but the lifelong scars left on the survivors.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, too, that these murders were really just the tip of the iceberg with Leslie Irvin.
Right.
He admitted to over 20 burglaries and robberies. I mean, the guy was like a one-man crime wave.
Wow.
Just leaving a trail of fear and destruction across the region.
It's almost unbelievable. So how do they finally catch this guy?
Well, from what I've read, it sounds like pure luck played a big part.
Really?
Sometimes it's the tiniest detail that can crack a case wide open.
Right.
And in this case, it was a group of teenagers. They were just out for a drive.
They ended up playing a key role in catching Irvin.
Wow. How?
Well, they spotted Irvin's car parked on this rural road.
Okay.
And get this. What caught their eye was a dent in the door.
A dent.
A dent that had been mentioned in the newspaper report.
Wait a minute. So these teenagers are out there like playing detective?
I know, right?
That's incredible.
And it gets even better.
Okay.
They pull up right behind Irvin's car.
Okay.
And they yell at him.
No way.
Even though they weren't totally sure it was him.
Wow. Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Seriously.
So what happened?
Their parents, thankfully, called the police.
Smart.
And the police were able to confirm that it was indeed Leslie Irvin.
Wow. That's a huge break for law enforcement.
Absolutely. But that's where things get even more complicated.
Okay. How so?
Remember, Irvin's crimes crossed state lines.
Yeah.
Indiana and Kentucky.
Okay.
So this sparked what we call a jurisdictional battle.
Okay.
Basically, both states wanted to be the first to put him on trial.
Oh, wow. So like a tug of war over who gets to prosecute him.
Exactly. Imagine that.
Wow.
In the end, they decided to start with the trial for Wesley Kerr's murder in Indiana.
I bet that trial was a total media circus.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, this was huge news.
Huge. The media frenzy around this case was off the charts.
Right.
This wasn't some big city, this was a tight-knit community.
Yeah.
And everyone knew about the Mad Dog Killer.
Right.
Finding an impartial jury, that was going to be a monumental challenge.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Small town, everyone's talking, rumors spreading like wildfire.
Yeah.
It's got to be almost impossible to find someone who hasn't already formed an opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the defense attorney knew that right away.
Okay.
He immediately requested a change of venue,
Smart.
hoping to find a jury that was less influenced by all the constant media coverage.
Makes sense. Did it work?
Well, it was granted,
Okay.
but the trial was only moved to a neighboring county.
Oh, so not really that far away.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The media attention was still insanely high.
I can only imagine.
Later on, the Supreme Court actually criticized the district attorney.
Really?
They said he was basically fanning the flames.
Oh, working with the media to make it a bigger spectacle?
Exactly. It was all about turning it into this huge show instead of actually seeking justice.
Oh, wow. So they had to go through this huge jury selection process?
Oh, yeah. Massive. Took weeks.
Really?
Interviewed hundreds of potential jurors.
Wow.
Get this, 268 people were excused because they already believed Irvin was guilty.
Wow.
And over 100 others were excused because they opposed the death penalty.
Jeez.
So in the end, they managed to put together a jury.
Okay.
But even then, 8 of the 12 jurors admitted that they already thought Irvin was guilty.
8 out of 12.
8 out of 12. Before the trial even started.
That's mind-blowing. So basically this guy's walking into a courtroom where the majority of the jury has already condemned him.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. Did the Supreme Court address that issue? Like the media potentially swaying the jury?
They did. But before we get to that, let's talk about what happened during the trial itself.
Okay.
I mean, the media coverage had a palpable effect on the whole thing.
Really? How?
Well, for starters, Irvin was paraded into the courtroom
Yeah.
on what looked like a chain dog leash.
Seriously?
And to make matters worse, the prosecutor kept calling him Mad Dog in his closing statements.
Oh, wow.
It was like they were putting on a show for the public,
Right.
instead of trying to get to the truth.
It sounds like they were playing to the public's fear and anger
Exactly.
instead of just focusing on the facts of the case.
And that's what really bothered the Supreme Court.
Okay.
See, Irvin was found guilty
Okay.
and sentenced to death.
Wow.
But his case ended up becoming this pivotal moment in legal history
Really?
because the Supreme Court ultimately ruled that Irvin's right to a fair trial had been violated.
Wow.
And it was all because of that crazy pretrial publicity.
It's incredible how one case can have such a huge impact on the legal system. So what happened? Did they overturn the conviction?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
But before we get into that,
Yeah.
Irvin managed to pull off something straight out of a Hollywood movie.
What do you mean?
He escaped from jail.
No way. Are you serious?
I'm totally serious.
This guy's like a real-life action movie villain. How did he even do it?
Get this.
Hmm.
He made his own keys.
Wow.
Makeshift keys.
Out of what?
Paperback book covers, tin foil, and glue.
Seriously?
Yeah, I mean, you got to admit the resourcefulness is kind of impressive.
It's unbelievable. Escapes from jail, sentenced to death, nicknamed Joe Goebbels. This is insane. So he breaks out. What happens next?
Well, he took off west, trying to disappear.
Right.
But as he say, you can run, but you can't hide.
Right.
He was eventually recaptured in San Francisco, trying to pawn some stolen goods.
Oh, wow.
He was then brought back to Indiana for a retrial.
Okay.
But this time around, without the threat of the death penalty hanging over him.
Right, because the Supreme Court said the original trial wasn't fair.
Exactly.
So no death penalty the second time.
Right. From what I understand, he ended up spending the rest of his days in prison. He even picked up a hobby.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Leatherworking of all things.
Really? That's a surprising detail. Kind of humanizes him a little bit.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of hearts, there can be those unexpected flickers of humanity.
Yeah.
So the Mad Dog killer, Leslie Irvin, he died of lung cancer in 1983
Okay.
while he was still serving his life sentence.
Wow.
Actually, his cellmate at the time was James Michael Lineback Sr.
Lineback.
He was in for attempted manslaughter. Just a small detail, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, it's those little details that can add another layer to the story.
For sure.
It's incredible to think how one man's actions can have such a lasting impact.
Absolutely.
Not just on the victims and their families,
Right.
but on the entire legal system.
Yeah, and that's what makes this deep dive so compelling. We've uncovered these really chilling details of Irvin's crimes, but we've also seen how his case forced the country to change how we think about justice.
It's crazy. This is just the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah.
There's so much more to explore. I mean, what does this case tell us about society's fascination with true crime?
That's a good question.
How do we balance the public's right to know with the defendant's right to a fair trial?
Those are great questions. Ones that we'll definitely be diving into as we continue our deep dive here.
Okay.
We'll be examining those ethical considerations the legal precedents,
Okay.
and the lasting impact of Leslie Irvin's case on the American justice system.
This is going to be good.
Stay tuned.
Stay with us.
Yeah, it's a tough one, right?
It is.
You've got the media. They have a responsibility to report on these crimes and keep the public informed.
Of course.
But at the same time, you have this crucial right of the accused to be presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Absolutely. And it's so clear in Irvin's case how that media portrayal of him as this mad dog killer really fueled that presumption of guilt.
Yeah, totally.
Just saturated the entire community,
Right.
made it almost impossible to find an unbiased jury.
And that's exactly what the Supreme Court was trying to address.
Right.
They acknowledged straight up that all that excessive pretrial publicity, well, it could taint the jury pool and threaten the defendant's right to a fair trial.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just about overturning Irvin's conviction. It was about setting a precedent
Right.
to protect the integrity of the justice system for everyone.
It really makes you think about how we consume news and information today, especially with social media.
Oh, for sure.
How do we make sure the public is informed while still protecting someone's right to a fair trial?
Right.
I feel like we're constantly trying to strike this balance.
It really is a balancing act.
Yeah.
And the Irvin case really laid the foundation for how we approach these situations.
Hmm.
You know, his case didn't end with him. It sparked a whole bunch of changes,
What?
like stricter rules around change of venue requests
Okay.
and more thorough jury selections.
Makes sense.
It's all about making sure everyone, even someone accused of these terrible crimes, gets a fair shot in court.
So it's not just about the legal procedures, it's also about how the media chooses to cover these high-profile cases.
Exactly.
Their reporting can really shape public perception,
It can.
and that in turn can impact the trial itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sensational headlines,
Mm.
biased reporting, those things can easily sway public opinion
Mm-hmm.
and potentially prejudice the jury pool. The Irvin case really sparked this bigger conversation about media ethics and responsibility.
It makes me think about all the true crime documentaries and podcasts out there.
Right.
It's a genre that's exploded in popularity.
It has.
But how do these creators navigate that ethical tightrope?
Right.
It feels like a really tricky line to walk.
It is. There are definitely examples where media coverage has probably crossed the line.
Yeah.
But I think the key is striving for objectivity.
Right.
Present the facts of the case without resorting to sensationalism,
Mm-hmm.
without turning the individuals involved into caricatures.
Makes sense. So it's about acknowledging that even when the crimes are horrific, the accused still has rights.
For sure.
And it's the court's job to determine guilt or innocence, not the media's.
Exactly. But let's kind of zoom out for a second.
Oh.
What does Irvin's case tell us about society as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
This intense fascination with crime and criminals,
Mhm.
where does that come from?
It's a great question. I think it taps into some really deep-seated human instincts.
Oh, definitely.
Crime stories often play on our primal fears,
Yeah,
our anxieties about safety and security.
right.
They offer a glimpse into the darker side of human nature,
Mm.
which can be both terrifying and strangely compelling.
Yeah,
It's like that feeling you get when you see a car accident.
right.
You don't want to look, but you just can't help but stare.
Exactly. There's also this element of moral judgment.
Okay.
We want to believe that good triumphs over evil,
Right.
that justice is served.
Yeah.
And crime stories can offer a sense of closure,
Hmm.
a way for us to kind of process these complex emotions.
I think in some cases it's also about trying to understand the why.
Right.
Why would someone commit such a horrific act?
Yeah.
Is there something we can learn from these cases?
Exactly.
Something that might help prevent future tragedies.
I think that's a key element. We're naturally curious.
We are.
We look for explanations. We look for patterns.
Mhm.
We want to make sense of the senseless.
Right.
It's a very human impulse, I think, to try and find meaning in chaos.
Absolutely. So looking back at the Irvin case, what do you think is the most enduring legacy?
Hmm.
Is it the legal precedent, the societal impact, or is it something else entirely?
I think it's a powerful reminder that justice is fragile. It requires us to be vigilant,
Right.
to commit to due process,
Yeah.
and to recognize that even the most notorious individuals deserve a fair hearing. The Irvin case really forces us to confront the complexities of media influence and public opinion,
Yeah.
and that delicate balance between the right to know and the right to a fair trial.
It does.
These are issues that are still so relevant today,
Right.
even all these years after Leslie Irvin faded from the headlines.
That's a really powerful takeaway. I think that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating.
I
It's
think.
not just about the crime itself.
Right.
It's about exploring the ripple effects,
Mm.
the ethical considerations,
Yeah.
the questions it raises about ourselves and society as a whole.
It's about peeling back the layers,
Yeah.
uncovering those hidden details
Mm.
and connecting the dots to reveal the bigger picture.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
Okay.
We've examined those chilling details of Irvin's crimes.
Yeah.
We delved into the media frenzy that surrounded his case.
Mm-hmm.
We saw how it impacted the U.S. legal system.
Right.
And we even touched on the psychology behind our fascination with true crime.
Yeah.
But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really talked about yet.
Okay.
Irvin's daring escape from jail.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, he crafted those makeshift keys out of book covers, tinfoil, and glue?
That's right.
It's like something straight out of a movie.
It really is remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
It speaks to his desperation,
Yeah.
his will to escape, his refusal to just accept his fate.
Right.
It's just a small piece of the larger story,
Yeah.
but I find it incredibly revealing.
Right. It adds another layer to this complex character.
Yeah.
He was a killer, yes.
Yeah,
But he was also clearly cunning and resourceful.
for sure.
It reminds us that even the most monstrous figures can possess these unexpected qualities.
Precisely. It challenges us to avoid oversimplifying,
Right.
to just label individuals as purely good or evil.
Right.
There's always more to the story,
Mm-hmm.
more to uncover.
Yeah.
And that's what makes exploring these cases so fascinating.
It is. And that's what makes these deep dives so engaging.
Exactly.
It's about looking beyond the surface,
Right,
digging deeper,
Yeah.
trying to understand the nuances, the motivations,
For sure.
complexities that make up a human life,
Yeah.
even one as dark as Leslie Irvin's.
Well said. Before we wrap things up, I want to pose a question to our listeners.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the media's role in shaping public opinion.
We have.
But what about our own responsibility as consumers of information? How do we sift through all the noise, the biases, the sensationalism,
Yeah.
to arrive at a more nuanced understanding of these really complex issues like crime and justice?
That's a great question. And it's one that I think each listener needs to really grapple with on their own.
I agree.
It's easy to get caught up in the drama,
It is.
the intrigue,
Right.
the emotional roller coaster of these true crime stories.
For sure.
But we can't ever lose sight of the human element,
No.
the real lives that are impacted,
Yeah.
the importance of seeking justice while upholding the fundamental rights of everyone involved.
Well said.
Yeah,
It's definitely food for thought for our listeners
it is.
as they continue to explore these fascinating and often really challenging topics. It's easy to fall into those traps, those ready-made labels, those narratives,
Right.
especially with true crime.
Especially with true.
And dog killer.
Right.
It conjures up this very specific image,
It does.
creates a certain expectation.
It does. And it almost dehumanizes.
Yeah,
You reduce a complex individual to a caricature,
right.
and then it's harder to have those nuanced conversations
Right.
about the why, the how,
Yeah.
the lasting impact of these crimes.
And we lose sight of the fact that everyone has a story.
Yeah.
I mean, Leslie Irvin was a killer, yes,
Yes.
but he was also someone's son,
Right.
maybe a brother,
Right.
maybe a friend at some point.
Right.
It's easy to forget that even these notorious figures had lives before their crimes,
They did.
lives that shaped who they became.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that there's always more to the story than what makes the headlines.
For sure.
We can't just focus on the crime itself.
Right.
We have to look at the whole picture, the individual's background,
Yeah.
the societal factors that might have contributed.
Right.
And it's not about excusing their behavior. It's
Yeah.
about trying to understand,
Yeah.
the complexities of the human experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And it challenges us to look beyond the surface,
it does.
to dig a little deeper,
Yeah.
to try and understand the root causes.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't excuse the crime,
No,
but it can help us to create a more just and compassionate society.
it can. And it brings us back to that question you posed earlier.
Yeah.
What is our responsibility as consumers of information?
Right.
How do we engage with these stories in a way that's informative and responsible? How do we avoid perpetuating those harmful stereotypes or, contributing to the sensationalism that surrounds these cases?
Right. It's a question we should all be asking ourselves, I think.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with being critical thinkers.
Right.
Questioning those narratives that are presented to us.
Yeah.
Seeking out multiple perspectives.
Right.
Recognizing that there's rarely a simple answer.
Right.
A clear-cut good guy and bad guy.
There rarely is.
These are complex situations.
They are.
A lot of gray areas.
We need to be mindful.
Yeah.
Mindful of the victims.
Absolutely.
And mindful of the complexities of the situation.
Right.
We can't let the drama and intrigue overshadow the real human impact of these crimes.
Well said. And we can't forget that even the most notorious criminals are still human beings.
Right.
They deserve due process.
Yes.
And a fair hearing under the law.
They do.
The legal system is designed to protect everyone's rights.
It is.
And that includes the rights of the accused.
Absolutely. Well, folks, it looks like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Leslie Irvin case. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From the chilling details of his crimes
Right.
to the lasting impact his case had on the U.S. legal system.
Yeah.
We even talked about the psychology of true crime
We did.
and our own responsibilities as consumers of information.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot to digest. But I hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did.
It's been a journey, that's for sure. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Right.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep researching, keep thinking critically about these complex issues.
Absolutely.
You know, maybe you'll uncover some new insight.
Yeah.
Some detail that adds another layer to the Leslie Irvin story.
That's what we love about these deep dives.
Me too.
It's about peeling back the layers, challenging our assumptions,
Yeah.
engaging in thoughtful discussions.
Yeah.
And we hope you'll join us again for our next exploration into the world of true crime.
I hope so too.
Until then, keep those critical thinking caps on
For sure.
and stay curious.